This is Minimalish. I'm your host, Desiree, and before we get started, let me be clear. This podcast isn't just about minimalism. It's a podcast about living fully. Over the past few years, I've learned that living with a little less in our homes and on our calendars leads to less cluttering up our minds, which simply helps give us the space to give our time and thoughts to the things that actually matter. So what do we talk about on here? We talk about minimalism and decluttering and how to get there, yes. But we also have conversations about pursuing intentionality in the things that matter, like our motherhood, faith, relationships, work, and mindset. Minimalish is a podcast for the women committed to contentment and loving the life in front of them, committed to living with a little less so they can create space for the things that matter most. What it's not about, how many spoons you should have, or any kind of rules or legalistic minimalism that promises you'll be happier if you just get rid of more stuff. Getting rid of stuff isn't what will make you happy. It's about the life you live with the new space you find. If that sounds good to you, grab a mug of whatever you like and stick around. I'm so grateful you're here. Hi friend, welcome back to the Minimalish podcast. I'm excited to share this one with you today because I think it is so relevant to everyday life really, but it's relevant to the time that we've been going through in 2020. Let's just leave it at that. I think right now, more than ever, in this time where over the past few months we've been socially distanced from one another, or we have just been dealing with a lot of maybe trauma or jobs that have been lost, or people are dealing with a lot of anxiety right now. This is a time more than ever to care for one another and to build community. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Due to coronavirus, community is really hard to build right now, and that might be true. But I think it is about time that we, just care for each other in whatever way we possibly can. If we haven't already been thinking of that over the past few months, it's time to really just think of our people, right? Check up on them. If you can see them in a safe way, do it. But this episode is going to be, we're going to be approaching a topic that I think can help you do that if you do want to still stay social distance from one another, and that is, we're talking about feeding people. We're talking about hospitality in the form of bringing someone a meal, bringing someone you love, someone in your community who needs it, a meal. And there can be several reasons for that. Maybe someone just had a baby. Maybe there's been a death or some kind of sickness in the family. Or maybe it's just the fact that, someone is a working mom and she still has to stay home with 4 kids while she's working because of coronavirus. And you can tell, that's maybe this person I'm describing is similar to someone you are friends with or someone in your community. Maybe they're having a hard time with that, because who wouldn't, right? Maybe that's you, but whatever. Providing someone with a dinner that can feed their family, maybe even a batch cooked dinner that could feed their family for a couple of days, is a great way to care for someone, to show them you care, and to just provide them with something essential and help them get through a hard thing, whatever that hard thing might be. So if we can't share meals together across the table right now because of coronavirus and the need to social distance, maybe we can share meals with one another to help one another by dropping it on a friend or a neighbor's doorstep. So I won't talk much more on the subject because today I am talking to Janet Elsbach. She's the author of the cookbook Extra Helping, and this cookbook is full of recipes for caring, connecting, and building community one dish at a time. I love the subtitle on the back of the book. It says, "Show up, be kind, and cook." And these recipes in here are delicious. They're recipes that you can make for your family and then make extra to take to someone. Just make it easy to show hospitality, to be kind to someone in your community, to show up for someone who needs it. So I think you're going to love this episode. I love Janet's perspective. I love all she has to say about food, and I love talking about food. Who doesn't? So let's just get to it, because I think showing up for someone with food to help them get through their day is a great way to intentionally love on someone and build community. Today, I'm so excited to be covering a topic that I think is really important and that not that many people are talking about. We're going to talk about serving people through food. So I've got Janet Elsbach. So Janet, could you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do before we really dig in? Sure.
I wrote a book about food, but I'm not really a food professional. I came at it from the position of a home cook. I identify as a writer and a teacher than as a food person. And I live in Western Massachusetts in the Berkshires. I teach writing to adults with disabilities and sometimes to high school students also, and spend a lot of my free time with dogs.
That's awesome. Do you have dogs, or do you?
I do. I have a few of my own, and then I foster for a couple of rescues, so I get to spend time with lots of other dogs, which is really nice. And two of my dogs are trained as therapy dogs, so we spend time in different settings, just bringing comfort to people with their big, or actually in one case, very tiny little snoots.
Oh, that's so fun. And I used to be an English teacher, so I taught writing to 8th graders for a while. So
wow.
I can relate with you on that. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Nope, you go ahead.
So we are going to really dig into, it sounds like really you nurture people in a lot of ways. You have therapy dogs and you help people in that way. But your book, Extra Helping, is about nurturing and building community through food. So can you tell me a little bit more about that, kind of why you wrote it and how this idea of building community through food became a passion of yours?
Sure. I would say that I often do say that food was kind of the love language in my house. So as I was growing up, we were all very oriented around the table and cooking with friends and for friends, and was really inspired in a lot of ways by a good friend of my mom's who's, sort of our family grew up with this other family. And whenever anything was happening, bad or good, that taxed the family in any way or anyone that she knew, she would show up with a jar of congee, which is a Chinese rice soup, which is just about the simplest thing on earth to make. And that really just kind of always stuck with me. Like, you always knew if something happened, if something hit the fan, Millie would appear with a jar of congee. And all of my love memories and all of my holiday memories and everything really centered around food and learning foods from different cultures and having lots and lots of people over to eat. And so it's just a part of the human experience that I'm really comfortable with. And then a few years ago, well, I have 3 children, so I feel like that's a really a deep education in accepting help and learning who's around you, and what your community will be like. And then a series of illnesses in my wider family, my birth family, and hardships there really brought home to me this idea of how valuable it is to have people show up for each other in this way. And I found, as those things, having babies and having illnesses and losses and things were occurring in this community of families that we were now part of, it's just struck me again and again that it's the most basic way to appear for people and to strengthen those bonds of community. And it's the most basic need, really. If I always say, if you got through something from the beginning to the end of it, whether it was an illness or a loss or a Wednesday, you must have eaten something. It's just a really basic part of the human experience. You need food to sustain you. So when you're wondering how to be helpful or how to show up for people, it's a really natural place to start. Even if you don't have a super foodie background, you know that if they're human, they're going to need calories to get through whatever they're doing. And it's also a really easy place to drop your own personal ball. Like, when things get really difficult, it becomes really hard to just feed yourself well. So it's a really, to me, it's just a natural place to begin when you're looking for a way to be of service to somebody.
Yeah. And I love anything that really is focused on building real face-to-face community, because in our current culture, we have gotten so far away from that, and connecting often is happening over technology.
Right.
So just this idea that we can do this simple task, but also it shows such effort and love towards others, and it's also very helpful. So I want to know from your perspective why this is important and why it's something that we should make time for, because there are a lot of apps that will help us do this nowadays. I know when I had a baby a couple of years ago, a church I was going to at the time, they had something in place for people to sign up on, like Sign Up Genius or something like that, to be able to bring food. So why is this important though? Like, why is it, if that would come to your email, like, can you bring food to this family in the community? Like, why is this something that we should make time for?
It's my favorite kind of email. I love getting that kind of email. Well, I think you touched on something that's really at the core of your question, which is that the way we live now, just sort of generally, is very technology oriented, very kind of individual, you to your screen. And also in this country at this moment, and in this moment in the kind of globally, we're much more attuned to what separates us and divides us and isolates us than we are to what unites us. And there are these universal human experiences, birth, illness, moving house, loss, that could be really, I don't want to use the word unifying, because you can still agree to disagree with, there's just a panoply of opinion and position in the world, and I'm not suggesting that we should get to a place where that isn't true. But anytime that you can tap into, oh, that person is a human, just like I'm a human, it feels to me like it rights the balance. It strengthens this sort of web of connection that is goes all around the world. And the othering, there's so many forces contributing to that right now, and this is just such a basic, simple, accessible thing that we can tap into every day. One of my favorite kind of mini meditations, like to ground myself if I feel like everything's kind of getting out of whack and I'm overwhelmed by things, is just to think about, if I'm eating something, just a carrot or a piece of cheese, I can kind of drop into, like, how did this get here? How did this get to my house? Somebody planted it, somebody harvested it, somebody washed it and packaged it, or milked the cow, or there's like a connected element to just about everything if you stop and kind of drop into it. And that's why I think cooking for each other is just there's so many opportunities within it to connect both to where our food comes from and how we're connected to the earth and how we're all connected to each other, and that there's just this unifying element that's available to me through food. Yeah,
there really is. And the recipes in your book, I love that they are, I don't know, they seem like they're comforting, they're warm, and you have recipes for different types of kind of experiences. And can you kind of explain a little bit about why you did that, or even just like, what's your favorite recipe to make, or what's your favorite, food to bring someone who maybe, like, a couple different examples if you want to, and just kind of talk about how you have different food for different situations. Does that make sense? Like if someone had a new baby, or if someone was, going through a loss of a parent or something like that.
Yeah, I think it can be hard to think of like one thing that's good in all situations. Again, I would go back to rice congee, because just basically really hard to find someone who can't eat what's in that and can't find some way to enjoy it. And it can be super mild and easy, and you can add all kinds of things to it to make it into more of a like meal. So that would be the one thing. It's also impossible to mess up. It is the world's simplest food to prepare. So I definitely would zero in on that one. But the reason the book is structured in the way that you reference, like food for moving, food for having a baby, that kind of thing, that organizing idea, I think that was really a gift from a friend of mine when I was already in the process of writing the book. And I was having that sort of scattered feeling about like, how am I going to winnow down this huge like folder of ideas to something that's presentable in a book format. And she offered me that idea of like showing up in these particular situations, like what is it that makes a food seem right for this versus that. I had a really, my sister showed up for us my sister showed up after each of my children were born, but I remember feeling really like riveted on the way that my middle sister showed up after my first baby was born, and just seemed to know exactly what I was hungry for before I knew, and like appeared with it. And I'm always kind of trying to get back to that mojo moment. Like, how did she do that? And there's a writer, Lori Colwin, who writes a lot about knowing like just what to give to someone. And when I first came across her writing, I was like, oh my God, somebody's as geeky about this as me. This is amazing. Because I really like the idea of things that balance out a situation. Again, when my children were really little, I was lucky enough to meet this woman who's both an incredible cook and a gardener and herbalist. And she also had this kind of witchy way of just like, oh, what's good for this is this kind of instinct. And I love that idea. Like, if you've had like a feverish drying out kind of illness, like, what would be the antidote to that? Like, what would restore balance in that situation? Or if you've had like, a lot of upheaval, like either you've had like stomach flu upheaval or your house has moved and you just kind of need to be rooted and settled, what would help you in that kind of situation? And that is always the key for me when I'm trying to figure out what to bring someone, is like, what are the like main qualities of this situation and what would help restore balance? And then thinking of it in terms of those life situations, illness, loss, new baby, that kind of thing, help me organize. But really, almost anything would do in almost any situation, as long as you've kind of breathed into it a little bit, like, oh yeah, they've had this, so I think it would be, even though this isn't a chapter for having a new baby, I think this is really relevant for this person who's recovering from an illness.
Right.
Just paying attention, just a little bit of attention, a little bit of curiosity always seems like it is a doorway that you can kind of widen and be like, oh, I know. And also, the main ingredient is that curiosity, is asking, what are you guys hungry for? What have you had too much of? What's your comfort food? What makes you feel happy? You can always get good guidance there. The recipes are, I believe in them, or they wouldn't be in the book, but it's really more just to give people a place to start. And the best thing you can do is kind of ask, like, what are you looking for? What are you hungry for?
Yeah. And I think, at least I love that idea of just restoring balance in the small ways that we can, through food or nurturing in that specific situation. And it does feel a little bit complex just hearing it. I'm not the best cook there is, but I love that you've done so much of that work, since this is a gift and passion of yours, that you've made this resource so that others can do that without having to, at least have a resource to start. So yeah. I'm grateful for that, because I do want to ask you, there are common excuses. I'm sure that maybe you've heard them since you put out a book about it, but I know that things that have come up are just things that I think that, sometimes in the back of my mind, when I think I want to cook something for a party, even, I will think about, okay, I would love to cook this one dish, but I'm not a good cook. Or I would love to bring something or try something new, but, I'm not that gifted in the kitchen. Or someone might feel like they're too busy to do this. So for this specific situation, when it is a great way to show up for people, to bring food, what do you do with this excuse of, speaking to the excuse of, I'm not good at this, or I'm too busy for this? They're two totally
Yeah.
different excuses.
Well, I always think about I can't remember. I would think it was a lunch, and I came with something. We were sort of a potluck thing, and this woman said, "Oh, I could never do what you do. The only thing I know how to make is brownies." And I thought, well, make brownies. Be the person who makes brownies. Like,
Yeah,
they're pretty much always useful to someone.
right.
Even if they're not directly useful to the person you're cooking for. So if you have one thing that you do, just do that. That's great. But I think there's like getting back to that idea we were talking about, like what unifies us and what like helps break down sort of perceived barriers to connection. It's such a human thing to want to do something and to try to do something. And those things are really separate from the result. Like, even if you tried to make, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that would be sort of difficult, like homemade pasta or something like that. Like, there's dozens of ways it can go wrong. But if you did that and it didn't come out like magazine ready and perfect, but you showed up with it for someone, you spent the whole day or whatever portion of the day you did spend on that thinking about them and trying to make this thing. Like, that is such a humanizing, connecting, like, beautiful idea that the result, I would say, just like, don't be super attached to the result. The effort and the willingness to do that is a really nutritive part of whatever you try to do. And pick something simple, pick a single thing, and just try that. And if it doesn't come out like ready for its close up, so be it. You've still done something. You've still made the effort, and you've that can be the place where the person connects to it as much as how gorgeous it is or how exactly perfect it came out.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I've never received food, and it might not be, 100% the best food I've ever eaten. I've never thought to myself, like, oh, how dare that person bring me something,
Exactly. Like, that's the thing. Like, that's a really valuable idea too, because I've spoken a lot, and especially since the book came out, about the really humbling ways that I've learned to receive help, because I've been helpful. And I really thought, this is kind of crazy, but I really thought that taught me how to be helped. And there's related skill sets, but they're not the same. And so if you can drop into that for yourself, like, wow, when was the last time somebody brought me something to eat? And I was like, are you kidding? You're bringing me that? You never feel that way. You feel like, oh my gosh, that's so nice. Thank you. And so remember that when you're offering help too, like, it's very unlikely that the person is going to be like, get away from me with that. They're much more likely to respond the ways that you have, like, oh, that was so nice, thank you. Because it's that ingredient, that element of how you thought of them, and as you were doing all those things, deciding to do it and sourcing the materials and putting it together and showing up with it at their house. You can, like you said, you can use all kinds of technology now to send a meal to somebody, and they will be fed, and it is kind, and I'm totally for it. And if you can bring it or send it, or bring something you've made, it's that much better, because there's all this, like, you were thinking about them and holding them in your mind that whole time that you were doing that. It's like the magic extra ingredient.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, there's something to be said about even just, I don't know, I can remember being, because it wasn't that long ago, being postpartum and knowing that, okay, these people are going to show up to my door when I'm kind of in this cave and not seeing people because it's a first child. I don't know what I'm doing. So I think that too is something, there's just something about that there are people showing up to your door and caring for you, whoever they are. It doesn't have to necessarily be someone who is a best friend or, your closest colleague, but just the fact that they are within your community and they're showing up for you.
Yeah. And I met so many people, not only when I was having babies, but, writing the book and working on the book and then being out with the book. There's no one more evangelical about the meal train than a woman who has been shown up for after she's had a baby. Like, because you said, especially with a first baby, it's such an isolating experience. You're like, what has happened to my life, and how will I ever do this? I don't have the skills. Why am I entrusted with this tiny being? And those meals that show up from other people who've been through that part of the process are really grounding and really helpful to be like, whoop, this community's out here waiting for you. You're joining a group. You're not like going off orbiting, another solar system. You're actually joining this community of people who are, who have children and who've been where you've been. And I met so many people who were like, I lived in a different city when I had my first baby, but I just became committed, like wherever I was, if I knew someone had a baby, I would be showing up for them with food, because there's this sort of cyclical human experience element to that. And that becomes true also, as I'm getting older and moving through my life, I can see that illness and all other kinds of upheaval are also have that quality of like, this is just part of the human experience. And so is answering the door with your unwashed hair and the milk all over your shirt and the spit up and the thing, and having someone come in if you had a loss and you haven't kept up with the mail or the cleaning or the dog walking or whatever. It's just part of the human experience, and seeing each other not spit shined and ready for public consumption, but like in those kinds of moments, it's humbling, but in a good way. Like, oh yeah, we all go through that.
Yeah, it's so true. And
it doesn't have to be food. I mean, obviously for me it's food, but it doesn't have to be food. It's just this idea of like, how do you find the little opening that is the place that you connect to the idea of connecting to this other person. Like, it could be that you clean their gutters, or you shovel their driveway, or you do whatever needs to be done. But.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because it is true that, we all have different gifts and we all have different ways that we can serve one another. And I think the most important thing is that it's not about what you are bringing to the table. It's that you like have that space and make that space to actually do it. So
yeah.
I'm just curious, because you said you have 3 kids. I know this maybe has been something that's been a passion of yours for a long time. So, maybe it's not an excuse that you have ever made, even though you may have been very busy. But I'm curious of just what would you say to someone that would say, like, I just don't know, I feel like in our culture, we are even like, sometimes we are afraid to connect with people, and we make that excuse of busy because of it. But also there is a reality that a lot of people are busy. But what do you say, like, what is your rebuttal or suggestion to the idea of being too busy to help?
Well, you've opened busyness is, it's become this sort of cultural idea.
Yeah.
And also people are genuinely busy. And I think it's really important to find a way that you can at least begin that doesn't make you feel even more taxed, because nobody really wants you to like heave up on their doorstep and be like, here, my God, I made you this, it killed me. And now I'm going to go home and have like, cold cereal. My family's having cereal for dinner. Like, you got to find a way to do it that feels spacious and possible, because I feel like all of that kind of gets into the food and is part of that effort to restore balance. Like, it's not really restoring balance if you show up for a meal with someone, but you have to go home and like ice your head and
right.
It took so much out of you. So find a way to do it that feels you feel capable around, and that feels simple. And it likely is not. It will start to grow from there. But back to the brownie lady, like, if I had said to her, well, it's too tough tuna, sweetheart. Tomorrow you've got to show up with 3-course meal for this family that just had their 3rd child. She would have been paralyzed. But
right.
If you had said to her, okay, great. Well, there's a family on the other side of town that, just moved houses. I'm sure they'd love a pan of brownies. Well, that's in her wheelhouse. She can do that because she's already said that's easy for her, or, possible for her. So find a thing that's like maybe smaller in scale than you imagine, but that feels really possible. And then you can often build from that point. And definitely don't start by scaling mountains. And if it isn't edible, if what comes easily to you isn't edible, then do that. But it's just reorienting yourself, like you said, around this idea of coming to the table. Not so much what you're showing up with, but that willingness to be like, oh, how could I be of use in this situation? Because it's so cyclical. It's all, it's all going to come back around at some point. And that's what we're trying to do, is build communities where we catch each other, which is why that education in receiving help was a really valuable part of my life experience. Like, it's one thing, and we all have friends like that who will show up, or I hope everybody has friends like that who show up, but are very hard to show up for. And that doesn't have the same kind of feeling of balance to it. Like, you're doing as much for the world when you learn how to accept it and receive it, because it's the other, it's the mirror image of the thing that you're showing up to offer. And it's really changed the way that I show up to be forced by life circumstance to receive. Changes the way, if you're open to it, it can really change the way you show up to other people.
I hope you're enjoying today's episode, but I wanted to quickly take a break to thank today's sponsor. If you want to simplify meal planning, meal prep in general, Prep Dish is one of my favorite companies that help you out with this. Prep Dish is a meal planning service that sends you an email with a meal plan, a grocery list, and a prep ahead instructions for that meal plan every single week. And all of your meals are planned out for you. They're completely ready for the week when you follow those prep instructions. You can even choose from gluten-free, paleo, and keto options. It makes eating healthy so much easier, and the meals are also delicious. I've always been able to find a way to make the meals toddler approved. They're always husband approved. My whole family loves them. And I personally love that there's no guesswork when it comes to mealtime each day with Prep Dish, because as a mom, everyone, including myself, gets hangry at that time of day. It always seems like a busy time of day when I feel rushed. Last thing I want to be thinking about is trying to make up a meal from scratch. So thanks to Prep Dish, meals are already planned out for me. I've already done a bulk of the prep earlier in the week. And if you're looking to cook healthier meals for your family, but you also want to simplify the whole thing, definitely check Prep Dish out. The best part is that Allison, the founder, is offering listeners of Minimalish a 2-week free trial. So you've got nothing to lose. That's literally 2 weeks of meals planned out for you, grocery list and prep included, for free. Head to prepdish.com/minimalish to try it out. That's prepdish.com/minimalish to try it out. All right, let's get back to today's episode. Let's talk about kind of navigating communicating with someone, because we were just chatting a little bit about the idea of struggling to receive help. So how do you communicate with, like, how do you navigate communicating with someone who would be going through, whether it's a birth or whether it's a death in the family, that might have a hard time receiving help, or either way, there's just a lot of things going on during that time. So how do you navigate the communication part of this, of actually reaching out to the person? I mean, I know there are all the online ways that we can sign up for lists, but even at that, how do we work around dietary preferences, or just know, what that person might need?
Yeah, I think that's one place where I really am a big fan of technology, because those online tools for organizing meal trains make it a lot easier for people to be very frank about, my one kid's allergic to dairy and my other can't have whatever. Or it's much easier to tell that to an input form than it is to say it to another person, because a lot of people are sort of hesitant to sound too fussy, or we're impossible to cook for, like, they just don't even. And those online tools make it a little bit easier to just input, like, allergies, preferences, dietary thoughts, that kind of thing. And if you're the person who's organizing it for someone, I think usually that's somebody who knows the people pretty well and is able to say, look, just tell me the whole list and I'll put it in there and it'll be fine. But I always come back to curiosity, that like making a little opening for someone to say what they're really hungry for, or craving or need. Sometimes particularly with illness, there's like a particular thing that is the thing that will help.
Yeah.
Those are a lot easier to type than they are to tell to people. And also, if you are working with people who are reluctant to accept help, or that it's somehow the human impact of it is minimized in a good way by being able to just put it out there, and they don't have to say it 100 times to people. Oh, I'm so sorry, but we don't eat this and we don't eat that, and we're kosher, and if they only have to say it one time, that's hugely helpful, especially if they're going through something difficult. So I really like technology for those kinds of things, and there's a bunch of different sites that you can do those things on pretty simply. And just giving people an opening where it's really okay to say, like, this is what we need. This is what is good for us. That's a really valuable thing to offer. And I always, it's just such a two-sided thing, because if you think about a situation where you have offered help and to people who are stricken by something, positive or negative, overwhelmed by something, either joy or grief or whatever, it's so satisfying. It's incredibly satisfying to have been able to offer something that that moved the needle for them a little bit. And so anytime that you're hesitant to like put your actual need out there or put anyone out by, asking them to do something, remember that when you're the person offering, it is incredibly satisfying to have found the thing that they need and done it. And you're offering that opportunity to someone when you state a need and allow them to fill it. It's not just that I'm a burden and, I don't want to put people, make more work for people. If you can remember, like, oh, I remember that was, I so wanted to help. And when I finally found the thing that was helpful, it just felt so good. That's what you're offering to people when you let them help.
Yeah. I know I can often tend to feel like I don't want to burden people, and I can just, I always remind myself that if I'm asking someone, what they're hungry for or whatever it is, and I want to bring them something, when they're reluctant to say what it is, I still want to do it. It's not like I think we get in our minds, like, if we do feel that way, if we do have a hard time accepting help, we get it in our minds like we're a burden to them, even though they've reached out. And if they've reached out, that means they want to help. They're not just doing it. Most people that I know aren't just doing it to look good for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that that idea. Well, one of the things that's made a lot easier by technology is you can see if people do what those things are intended to capture, which is you put down what it is you're bringing. You can see, like, oh, I was going to bring them, tuna casserole, but it looks to me like that'll be the 7th tuna casserole this week. You can adapt that way, so that you're not repeating something. I just had another idea based on what you said, and that's what happens. I start talking, and then oh, we're on this whole new section of the forest. That idea of curiosity and leaving them an opening to say what they're really hungry for is really the human possibility in those kinds of moments is pretty infinite, if you can do that.
Yeah. I just
I know it. Oh, I found it. I found it. Oh my God, I found a lot. That humor, I think humor can be a big help in most situations, applied judiciously. And also, if you're able to say, like, you know what, I'm going to make you dinner anyway, so you may as well tell me what you want, because I'm going to, that I think that oftentimes will give people a little bit more of an entryway or an on-ramp to be able to say, well, I know this is going to sound crazy, but all I want right now is cucumbers. and then you can just fulfill that need. And it's just a beautiful thing, because then they've gotten their cucumbers and you've gotten that feeling of like, I did the thing that was helpful. That's just sort of not like in an overbearing way or heavy-handed way to like, I'm going to help you even if you don't want help, but look, I'm going to do this anyway. So let's just, why don't you just tell me what you're really, what would really be helpful. And that's true for food, and that's true for, errands and all the other myriad ways that people need help when something difficult or just burdensome is going on, is to just make it seem almost like they're helping you, because they are. To say like, call them from the grocery store. I'm in the grocery store. Do you need toilet paper, cat litter, whatever? Or, make it sound like it's just so much part of what you're already doing that they're not really putting you out in any kind of a way.
Yeah. That's so good. And okay, so I think my favorite thing that you said is just this idea of creating a community where we catch each other. And I just feel like that is something that we could, like, I get afraid sometimes that that's something that we could lose if we continue in this tech focused, not necessarily just tech focused. I don't want to put the blame on technology, but the way that we use technology as our main form of connection in so many ways. So I'm just so thankful that you've put this book into the world. And where can people find the book? Where can people find you? I know that you write in other places as well. So where are all those places where people can find more about what you do?
Well, the book was put out by Roost, so it's available everywhere books are sold. Awesome. I always put in a little plug for independent booksellers when I say that. But so it's pretty widely available, and I have a website called A Raisin and a Porpoise, where I write in an ongoing kind of way about whatever it is that we're currently eating and what I think about the world.
Yeah, I love your website and your blog, because there are, most recipe blogs, or most blogs that talk about food, they do have a story along with it, but just the way that you do it is so different. And your stories and your writing is just beautiful. So I am fully recommending that everyone find you over there.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So
there was a little pushback around having a cookbook that didn't have photographs in it, but I kind of like the idea of people not being so attached to outcome and sort of limited by that. But like, just make food made by humans for other humans. Doesn't have to be so picture perfect.
That's so true. And mine never, ever turns out like what it would look like in the cookbook anyway. So I have to ask you, what is your favorite? I don't know if you can pick one, but I know that the book is in sections, but regardless, what is your favorite recipe to make for someone?
Well, this is going to be the kanji episode of your podcast, but I always come back to that, because everyone has time to make it, because it doesn't take very long to make, and it is it's basically the three things you're never supposed to do to rice. You use too much water, you cook it for too long, and you stir it a lot. So you're basically intentionally messing up rice, and then when you're done, you have this lovely thing that you can adapt to almost any situation. People are having the time of their lives and they just need help celebrating. You can layer on all kinds of spicy, delicious extra things. And if someone is just recovering, it can be just the plainest, simplest, most digestible. It's good for almost any dietary, thing that somebody may be believing in, and is endlessly adaptable. You can use different grains. You can use a combination of grains. So it's just a great thing. And it's, it sounds really exotic to people who have not grown up eating it, but it is in fact just rice or some grain and a lot of water. And even so, it is really delicious. So it answers all of those questions that you raised. Like, I don't know how to cook. I don't have time. I don't know the first thing about it. This is just so easy. So I love things like that, and I love the chapter at the end where it talks about taking care of yourself if you're in a caregiving role. That idea of like giving yourself a little bit of a break, or if you're showing up in a situation, being aware of the caregivers and their needs as much as you are the person who's like sort of at the center of the situation. I really like that chapter and that idea of, because it really gets to that idea of it's such a round robin, like sometimes we're the helper and sometimes we're the helped, and somebody takes care of this person so they can take care of that person, and it kind of all goes around. So I don't even know if that answered your question, but
yeah, it absolutely did. And I have never I don't think I've ever had it. I've definitely never made the rice congee, so I am going to have to. That's my.
You can use like any grain at all, and any combination, and it always comes out really great. And if you have nothing but a little bit of tamari or soy sauce to sprinkle on the top of it, you're still going to be pretty happy. But like I said, you can add all kinds of kugas to it and make it fancier.
That's awesome. Okay, so I have 2 questions that I ask every guest. And the first one is, what's something that you're simplifying right now?
I would say the idea of rest and the need for rest. Like, we spend so much time in our busy lives, like arguing ourselves out of the idea that we're tired and we just want to lie down. And I think that that's a really basic, like just like food, it's just like a really basic human need. And I like the way it informs not just how I take care of myself, but like the ways that I show up for other people, like offering the space to do that. It's a luxury to be able to just rest when you want to rest if your life circumstances are more difficult. So gearing your help to provide that for somebody else, I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, I love that. It's so needed and it's so neglected for so many of us. And then the second question is, what is something that you can't stop talking about right now?
Well, it probably comes as no surprise with the way that I have outed myself as a dorky, geeky, sort of helpful person, but I am completely obsessed with Mr. Rogers and have been my entire life. That's awesome. I just listened to a podcast called Finding Fred.
I've seen that.
Yeah, so good. So good. So I'm telling everybody to listen to that. It's just so good.
I live in Pittsburgh, so Mr. Rogers is a huge part of my life. Fun fact, my grandma dog sits for Mr. McFeely, like the actual one. So
that made my day. That is the most beautiful fact. Thank you. I'll be thinking about that for the rest of the day.
You're welcome. But yeah, I've been to his house and everything.
What kind of dog does Mr. McFeely have?
So I don't know. I think he's had Mastiffs in the past, and I think he still has one. Yeah. Like an English Mastiff.
Wow. Thank you.
So very big
dogs.
Little
gem of the day. Yeah.
You're welcome. I hope that really encourages everyone else listening too. Sure, everyone wants to know that. But well, this has been such a fun conversation, and I'm so grateful we got to talk about this. I'm so grateful for your book, and I am just thankful you agreed to come on and chat with me.
Well, it's been a great experience, and I really thank you for the platform and opening the door for all kinds of people to have their voices be heard. So thank you so much.
I hope my conversation with Janet encouraged you to go ahead and make up one of your favorite recipes, or grab her book, make a recipe from that, and feed someone that you love. Bring someone a meal who's either going through a celebration, a happy time, but might be really busy, or going through a hard time and might just need some extra help. We need each other now more than ever, as this year has been the way it's been, the crazy, crazy year it's been. So love on your people. That's my encouragement for you today. Love on them with food, if that's for you. If there's something else that you do best, then love on them in that way instead. I'm so grateful that you listened in. If this episode encouraged you in any way, if you enjoyed it in any way, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend or share it on social media. You could share it on Instagram and tag me. I'm super grateful for you for listening in, and I will talk to you right back here again next week.